All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Can everybody hear me? All right, good in the back. All right, awesome. So before I do anything, I just want to say I don't know if it was a mistake on my part or somewhere down the line. The title is a little different, what I was planning on talking about, than what got posted. So the last part got cut off. So you may say, why do you want to even try? So if that changes the context for anyone, feel free to get up and go. But before you do, let me just tell you what I want to talk about. I'm going to do a little bit of an intro. I'm going to talk about some assumptions and some baselines. So some assumptions I made before I tested, and then some baselines that I used to test. Some basics of Docker and Munki, visualizing the setup process, so what that looks like with Munki on Docker. Also, while we examine that, we'll kind of break down Docker. So I'm assuming you're a little new to Docker, and that's why you're here. So we'll kind of take our pre-existing knowledge of Munki and examine Docker with it, and then do an overview of those two together, some considerations I had, and then some conclusions, and then some time for Q&A. More than likely, time-wise, it'll look something more like this. Probably, please note the small a to the large Q. I will do my best to answer. I'm not a professional at this. I'm just an admin, Apple admin, trying to make sense of it to me. So that's why I'm here to share that with you. So taking in the title and taking in that bit, if you would like to leave now, I know there are a lot of other really good sessions going on right now, and I'll just give you a moment to do that. I promise you won't hurt my feelings.
We are the tip of the spear of the Docker and Munki community.
Yeah, there you go. So I'm going to just give you guys a minute to leave if you'd like. And then if you're still here, we'll get into it. There you go. Everything's on YouTube. Everything's on YouTube. All right, so let's get into it then. If you're still here, you want to hear about it. So let's get to a little bit about me. So I'm a husband, part-time adventurer. I recently relocated to the Pacific Northwest. I live in Bellingham, Washington, which is about an hour and a half north of Seattle. So you're thinking, hour and a half north of Seattle, so that's Canada. Almost. I can see Canada from my house. So we're up there a little ways. I'm an Apple admin at a small financial firm. We have about 90 people on staff. We have 3 locations in the United States. Bellingham, Washington's our headquarters. We have an office in Henderson, Nevada, which is outside of Las Vegas, and we have an office in Chicago. We also have an office in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, which is also under my umbrella that I have to support as well. We also have probably 10 sales individuals that travel around the country and are mobile most of the time, and we have a couple remote developers as well. My life before corporate, my life BC is I was in K through 12 in a school district just north of Dayton, Ohio. That's where I was when I really started getting involved in the community here. And then before that, I was a senior tech at a nonprofit organization, and we dealt a lot of, I did a really heavy video production and video editing and archival and multimedia production and asset delivery when I was there. So that's a little bit about me. I already talked this a little bit. My context is a financial firm with a rich Apple history. I know that kind of sounds weird that we're in finance services, and we're all Macs. There are 3 PCs on our grounds, 3 physical PCs. I'll say that. And those are Bloomberg terminals. So past that, we're all iMacs or MacBook Pros. I think my Munki report showed probably about 123 Macs right before I left. That includes remote sites and the Malaysian office. Yeah, so I would consider remote users the folks that are traveling out and about, although they do come back to Bellingham every once in a while. So why I started digging into this, I recently, like I said, moved and kind of inherited this. And I had these 3 sites. Some of the Munki servers are on Mac Minis hardware. Some of them are on Mac Minis VMware. They're on ESXi. So they're not the same, and there's a little bit of TLC to get the repos to sync to one another. And then I also have a lot of other duties. So like when I worked through K through 12, I had a lot of things like audits and InfoSec that wasn't really at the forefront of my concerns. Whereas at this new company, that is a huge concern of mine, and I would like to offload as much work onto automation as possible. I want it to be reliable, redundant. I don't want to touch it unless I have to, and I want what I would consider a modern solution. I'm not saying Macs aren't modern. I guess I want a new solution for me. I don't know. I don't know how I would define that. So what this is not a Docker fanboy talk. This is not a guide to set up Munki and Docker. This is not a guide to secure a Munki repo. This is not really a guide of any kind. This is a brand new concept. This is not a brand new concept. I mean, people run Munki and Docker a lot, and there's a lot of really, really good documentation out there for it, of which I have cited in this. At the end of the slide deck, if you pull it down, I have a bunch of links and stuff that you guys can peruse at your time. What this is kind of my thought process of I have 3 locations that I push Munki repos to. I have some VMs, I have some actual hardware. I have to manually sync everything. One of the syncing is over an IPsec tunnel, so bandwidth is terrible to Malaysia. So these are all like considerations that I had. What this is my opinions and my thoughts as I step through this process. So I'm just going to qualify with that. You may say something you don't agree on. Completely fine. It's your context. Just hold objections till the end. Yeah, and then some biased choices and decisions that I made, preconceived notions, bias that I had coming into this. You'll also see some easing into the ideas of Docker. So you may have heard about Docker, kind of looked at it a little bit, but this is kind of an introduction into a way to think about app deployment in the Docker environment with the use of Munki as an example. Yeah, so assumptions. Munki, you're using it. Who in here is using Munki? Who in here is thinking about using Munki? Okay, awesome. So I'm going to assume that you generally know how it works for the sake of this talk. If not, I get into a little bit there at the beginning of the really, really high-view basics of it. And then how many of you use Docker on the regular? Awesome. That's exactly where I was before I started this process. So that's great. I love it. So you have little to no experience. Awesome. That's right where I was. So as you come into these communities, you'll learn the first rule about Docker. Does anybody know the first rule about Docker? It's actually, and this is, so I went to a Linux Fest. It's called Linux Fest Pacific Northwest. And it's a lot bigger in that community. And it's Docker, Docker, Docker. And a lot even you probably see on Twitter and Slack and stuff, there's a lot of people talking about it. So I interpret the first rule of this being never shut the hell up about Docker. Because being a sysadmin and being in this environment right now, people they just keep talking about it. And I'm not going to say any names, but you know who you are. But for me, it was more, would it work for me and it wasn't worth my time? I am one sysadmin. I don't have a whole lot of time, and I got a lot of stuff to do. So was it really worth it? So I had a manager at the time who is no longer with us that kind of pushed me in that direction. You know, hey, you should look at Docker. Everybody's talking about it. All the cool kids are doing it. So why wouldn't you do it? So I was like, oh, I don't know. Like I came from an organization where we hosted it on Linux, and it worked fine, and we had multiple locations, and it was great. So why do I need to take time? But eventually, you know, I think, how could I say, she wore me down, as in it was a mandate. It was a mandate from the manager that you should probably look into this. So I think I was just her guinea pig to some degree, but I also learned a lot from it. So moving on. So baselines. I kind of approached this as a 3-tier solution. Tier 1, the go-to, kind of the starting point for everybody out of the box, Mac OS, whatever version it happens to be at the time, installing Munki via Munki in a Box. So those of you who have not looked at Munki yet, Munki in a Box by Tom Bridge is a script that will do everything for you in the setup process. However, caveat being you need to do your research prior to that so you know how you want to set it up. So just don't go get it, download it, and run it and see what happens. Read through the documentation, understand the parts that it's doing, comment out the parts you don't want. It's an amazing, amazing tool to get you up and running. Even in a test environment, it's fantastic. Segment 2, silo 2, as I would consider, is what if we put Munki on an Ubuntu server? So I picked 1604 LTS because it's the most current long-term support solution, and I used Nginx as my web front end. So we'll talk about what Munki requires to host a repo, but I chose Nginx, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Now, I'll stop right there because some of you said, whoa, Ubuntu, no, I'm not a Linux admin, I'm a Mac admin. Well, I'm quickly learning that the best way to be a Mac admin is also learn other things as well. So I'm sorry if I offended you with that, or if you just don't like the flavor. You're like, oh, I only use Red Hat. Well, congratulations, I learned on Ubuntu, so that's what I chose, and that's what was easiest for me, and I encourage you to do the same. When you get to the point, when we get especially to Docker, it's not going to matter what you use as your base layer, because everything you're going to be doing is in Docker, although there will be some considerations down the road. So the next kind of silo of testing, so I have my Mac with Munki in a box that I know how to do. I've done it, kind of the go-to standard. So something I haven't done it ever, Ubuntu server, so completely shell, no GUI. I hated it when I first started, but now I love it. Running Nginx to serve up the repo. And then third tier would be Docker running on some base OS. I'm not talking about, I don't know if there's probably something called base OS out there. No idea. That's not what I mean. It's just a thin OS. So for a thin OS, it's not thin OS either. That's a Dell thing, I think. But Snappy. I chose Snappy because, wait, no. That's not the Snappy I was looking for. So I actually went to get a picture of Snappy while I was here. Turns out there's a lot of places named Snappies around here. I didn't know that. But the one I'm talking about is actually from Ubuntu. So I kind of stuck with the same train of thought because I've used 1404. It's not a big deal. I'll go with it. So what this is it's basically a super thin operating system that a lot of people will put Docker on top of, or some small application appliance type thing. I'm not going to get super into it. If you want to learn more about it, go out there and check it out. Basically, what it'll allow you to do is run Docker without the overhead of everything else. And I'll talk about that here in a minute. So those are kind of where I started. I have a Mac. I install Munki in a box. I get the server up and running. No problem. Ubuntu. Okay, I'm going to install 1604. I'm going to get Nginx. I'm going to get up and running. Docker. I'm going to install a base OS that I chose Snappy, and I'm going to get Docker, and I'm going to get up and running. So before we dig into it, for those folks that are never used Munki before or have done a little research on it, I'm just going to talk about the basics real fast. So to understand Munki, you have to understand the Munki ecosystem, and I apologize for the folks in here who are already running it. I just want to get them caught up real quick. So there's 3 main parts. This is super, super high level, but there's a web server that will host your packages, your configurations, everything that you are sending out to your clients. You'll need an administration Mac, and I say Mac because it has to be a Mac. A lot of the tools that Greg Nagel has committed to this community are absolutely fantastic, but they're written for Mac OS, so you have to use Mac OS. And this Mac is what you would use to import files, export them and send them up to the repo. And then clients, which would be the machines that you're managing. So what you would see is Manage Software Center. Go in, pick your app, download it, and then there's some configs and stuff going on in the back end. So if we brought that out, it would look something like this. So you would need a server sitting up there that would communicate with the clients individually. For the sake of this illustration, we're going to simplify it, and we're really only going to look at the web server. So a client has to be a Mac because you want to manage Macs. So we don't really want to look at that. An administration mean has to be a Mac. So we don't really want to look at that. We just really are concerned with the web server. So what I would consider the Munki server, which, as you'll see, is nothing more than a web server hosting packages and documents in a particular order. So now we're going to go to Docker. So Docker at its core, if you've ever Googled Docker and gone to images, you've seen something like this. And this is what we're going to kind of break down with the idea of Munki requires a web server and storage. So as we move forward, what I did is I took time and I recorded a step-by-step guide for each option, the caveats noted with each install process in real time. So now we're going to take time and we're going to watch each of these. And I'm going to sit back and we're going to do that. Just kidding. Nobody's got time for that. So I'm not, again, going to tell you how to do this. I have at the end gave you a plethora of links on how to do it. This is more of a high-level why to do it. So let's look at this first. So what do we need? First thing we need, hardware. We need something to put it on. So what can we put Mac OS on? Macs. That's it. That's your only option, excluding Hackintoshes, et cetera, et cetera. But you can do it virtual, you can do it physical. Argument's invalid for this because it's still on Mac OS and you still need, according to the terms and conditions, it still needs to be a Mac. So, awesome. Moving on. We don't have a lot of choices. So now, hardware, and I put that in quotes here, for Ubuntu Server or Ubuntu Snappy, well, things get a little bit more wide open. So, I mean wide open. You can run Ubuntu Server on anything. I had a Munki repo running on a Raspberry Pi 2. Like, you can put it on whatever. You can put it on cloud platforms. The Intel NUC is basically a Raspberry Pi-sized, AWS. You could run it inside a VM on your Mac, like whatever, however you want to do it. Take your pick. Again, same with the Linux distro. It's totally what you're comfortable with or what you're going to get into. For the record, I did everything in a test environment on the FreeBee VirtualBox from Oracle. So if I was running Linux, it was inside a VirtualBox. It was free, it didn't cost me anything. I was doing it at home. Like, I didn't actually do a lot of my testing because it kind of happened at a weird time in between jobs. This was kind of an idea I'd been tinkering with prior to this job, but anyways, I digress. So we have the operating systems and we have the hardware, whatever. So let's take a look at operating system size difference here. So, rough, these are going to change depending on, what version of whatever you're looking at. So Mac OS, roughly 8 gigs. Base OS, Ubuntu, 700 megs. Snappy, 11 megs. So fairly big difference in size. But if we wanted to actually look at it to scale, it'd probably be something more like that. But why? Why does it matter? The more I thought about it, I thought it probably actually doesn't matter that much size-wise because storage is so cheap. It's really just the availability of fast storage that you would have for a service like this. So I would say storage, whatever. Repos usually don't get super big unless you're keeping everything. Cool. So now kind of moving on to the application layer. So we talked about Munki needing a web service, a web front end. So if you deploy Munki with Munki in a Box by Tom Bridge on Mac OS, you're going to end up with an Apache server. And Apache's the open source web front end. And you're going to end up with local storage. So you'll end up with a folder with Munki repo and all of these subfolders with packages, package info files, et cetera, et cetera. Lots of great Munki talks around, so feel free to get on the PSU YouTube or grab one this week. There's a lot of people who explain it a lot better than me. And then, so for Ubuntu 16.04, it kind of looks the same way. I choose Nginx rather than Apache. And why? Let's do this. Why did I choose Nginx? Well, it's because I want to fit in. So Nginx is really kind of the go-to web front end right now. It's super light. I thought it was really easy to use, and I had never touched a web front end before this project. So their documentation's incredible. Their website's awesome. I just all around loved it. So that's why I chose Nginx. And it's available in Docker as well as natively on Ubuntu. So that helped for kind of keeping things the same. So now we're going to go and look at what it would look like if I put Nginx on Docker. Well, the thing is with Docker is you have no storage. There's no local storage with Docker. So you have to have some place to put your data. So you now need a storage container. So these are what Docker calls containers. So you have an Nginx container, and now you have a storage container. And then you need some way to get to the storage, because these are still abstracted above the base OS. How do we get to the storage? So a common way to do it that you'll see is create an SMB container. And this is nothing but this SMB service to attach to the other storage container. The best way I can explain this is just think of these as like apps. So you have an app and its only job is to run SMB, and you just tell it where to go. And then you have one app and its only app is to be a folder. My only thing I'm doing is holding files. I'm an app, and my only thing I'm doing is hosting a web service. And that's what that does in Docker. But that being said, it can get immensely more complicated as you start having more and more instances of these running. Because then, not only if you have multiple instances and multiple storage, then you have to figure out how you're going to have proxy. Because if you have one, if your Docker server only has one web address, well, how does it know which actual web service to go to if there's only one address? So you would need to look at something like a proxy container, that could then redirect incoming traffic based on the URL to whatever web service storage that you would need. But again, we're getting a little too far in the weeds with that, so I'm going to back off. Graham Gilbert did a really, really great write-up about proxy containers and how to use them and how to set them up. Again, linked at the end of the talk. So let's go back and let's simplify it way down again. So forget about the OS, forget about whatever. So at this point, we have Docker. And Docker is a service. And then you have these two containers. So you have this storage container and this Nginx container. So let's look at how that would look for Munki. So we're in the contents of Munki. So who can tell me what is special about how Munki stores its files? Can anybody tell me? Nothing, exactly. He shook his head no, because there's not really anything special about it. It's just a simple file structure that you put your files into, and then the package info files will tell it, use the laser on this guy. The package info files will tell it where to go. Again, I'm not going to get too far into how Munki works, but what I really want to articulate is that there's nothing special here. This is just a folder structure. I mounted my Munki repo. Bam, folder structure. You put your icons in here, put your artwork in here. Nothing special. Nginx, fairly simple to host a web service. A couple configs and you're up and running. Again, I'm not going to tell you how to do it, but there's a great documentation on Nginx. But again, you're not really talking. You're saying you're not really talking about Docker. So let's slim it down even more. So Docker is a service that runs on your machine. So let's say you want a Docker image or a Docker container, two of which those things are different. So to pull a Docker image, it's very simple, just like a git pull. Once you have Docker installed, you would say Docker pull whatever, MongoDB, Nginx, MySQL, a folder structure. It's just whatever. That will actually, if I go back one, this is incorrect. I have this incorrect. This actually gives you an image, not a container, and then you would form a container from an image, which I talk about in the next step. So here's an example. Here's Docker Hub. Number one, Nginx, Ubuntu, Redis, Docker registry, all kinds of stuff. So these are just the ones that are available on hub.docker.com that you can say git or Docker pull Nginx or Docker pull Ubuntu. I'm not going to talk about why you would want to have Ubuntu running on a thin client that's running Docker, but I digress. We don't need to worry about that. So really, we're just going to say Docker pull Nginx. And I'm going to get this fresh install application of Nginx. So awesome. So I have this image. Think of it as right before you image a machine, you have an image. but you can do more with it. So instead of just running it as a container, you can also run something called a Docker file. And a Docker file allows you to do a little bit more complex things than just simply running an image. So in this example, we want to create that Nginx container that we saw earlier. But we also want to do a couple other things. We also saw that we needed a folder structure. We also saw that we needed a storage volume. So what this allows you to do is it allows you to just as it's written here, I didn't write this, I just found it on somebody's blog that you can see at the end. And step by step, this is what's going to happen. I'm gonna say Docker run, Docker file, whatever, go. And it's just going to go down the line. So it's going to say, OK, from Nginx. So it's going to go out to the hub if it hasn't already, or it's going to check to make sure you have the current version. If not, it's going to go out, grab it, pull it down. So it's got the image. And then it's going to say, OK, I want to run. I want to make the dir Munki repo. OK, I'm going to make this dir Nginx sites enabled. So add Nginx conf, add Munki repo conf. OK, these two things you'll have to make or mimic. There's some great ones already out there. You could go find them, put them in. It all just depends on what level of security you want to run on your repo. So what it's going to do is it's going to do just that. It's going to make this, it's going to make that, and then it's going to take that config and put it in, and then it's going to take that config and put it in. OK, awesome. So then it's going to create a volume, Munki repo, or as we saw it in the previous slides, storage. Munki repo is kind of long, so I just call it storage. So that's the same thing. And then what are we going to do? We're going to expose 80. We're going to expose port 80 to it on the host. So if you go to wherever you created this on, this host, 80, port 80, it's going to take you to this Nginx site. And that's all there is to it. Yeah, all there is to it. But really, though, it is. It's as simple as that. It just takes a lot of work up front to make sure that your configs are going to work. But as easy it is to set up, it's easy to tear down. You can just go into Docker, tear it down, change a conf, build it again. And that's the beauty of Docker, is the ability to test and rebuild quickly with no risk to the work that you've already previously done. So we can look at that Nginx conf, or that we just talked through that. And then, yeah. So this is cool. Is it making sense so far? Docker's super abstract. It took me a long, if you guys are getting it, I'm really impressed. It took me a long time to really understand that these little things are running on their own and there's nothing else. So an example would be if you were to and I'll get into this more in the caveats. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. But inside of this Nginx container, if you were to do top, if you go to your terminal and you just do top and you see everything that's running, it'll say 1, Nginx. That's it. There's no other processes. It's literally just the Nginx process, which was awesome. I was like, that's sweet. It's not doing anything else. I literally am just running what I want to run. I'm not running all these other services. I'm not running anything else. And then I'm like, oh, OK, cool. So I'm in it, and I'm going to change my conf. OK, how am I going to do that? How would I change my conf file? I would open it up with what? A text editor? OK. I'm just gonna nano this because I'm not a Vim, or I'm not that cool. So I'm just gonna nano this, and oh wait, nano doesn't exist. No text editors exist inside of that, literally nothing. So that was really hard for me to grasp around. I was like, oh man, so how do I change anything? We don't. You change the conf, rebuild the Docker, rebuild the entire container because it's so small. It's one service. It doesn't take any time at all. So it's a complete shift in the idea of, oh, I'm just going to go in and change my comps anytime I want to change something. Well, no, you're tearing it down and starting it up. That being said, notice this little white space here. They're separate. They're completely separate. So if you already have that volume that exists, you can tear up and put down that Nginx container as many times as you want, and your repo structure will never change. You just tell it where to look for that repo structure. So you could go in, and I can be making conf changes left and right, and you'll see in a little bit why I was doing it so much. And that storage volume never changed. Never changed at all. There's two types. There's a data volume and a data volume container. I'm not going to get into that for this, but do note that there is a difference. One, I believe, exposes data on the underlying operating system, and the other contains it. So for sake of this explanation, data volume container stores all of the contents within storage container. So how that could be applied would be cloud storage. So Docker SuperLite, you can run it on any kind of cloud service. A lot of cloud services will support containerized applications on whatever that they're running. So one way you could use this is to be something super scalable. So you have your web service that's running Docker. You've got your repo stored up in the cloud, and you have this web service, Nginx, running that hosts your repo, or hosts the web service to your repo, to pass through to your repo. So probably not super applicable to a lot of people in this room. And this is where this is the whole idea of microservices. Let's say, whatever reason, my entire organization decides they want to go download the 1011 installer package. Well, my one server is going to get slammed with requests and stuff. The beauty of microservices is you can put some intelligence in there, again, a little bit deeper than this, that will say, hey, I have this Docker file, and my storage persists in the cloud, so why don't I just instead have 4 more servers, taking the processing power and splitting it amongst all these different servers. To the client, they're still going to the same place, and then your cloud service is distributing that load amongst all of these. And with that little Docker file, you have the blueprints to do this. And you can just say, build it off of this Docker file. Again, I'm not going to get into hosting Munki on a cloud service. I haven't even done it myself. But as a high view, this is how this could become scalable. And I know there are people that have done it, and there's a lot of, I think it might even be Graham Gilbert. At one point, I believe he hosted his repos for his clients in the cloud. And then when he would bring people on to consult, he could then just point them at his cloud repo, and it would scale as he needed it. Super awesome for you, man. I know I don't need it. So good so far? Any questions yet? No? Okay, cool. Considerations. So this is kind of like, okay, I had gone through this and I tried each of these things. I had Mac OS running it. That was my current infrastructure. I got it up and running on Ubuntu, got it going, worked fine, and I got it running up on Docker. It took me a long time to get it up and running on Docker because I didn't know Docker. But I'll get to that in a second. One thing that I immediately thought of while I was getting all of these different test environments set up was ongoing maintenance. Mac OS, we all know, we love the 2016 003 or whatever security patch we may need. And then general operating system updates. So if you want to stay current, you're updating every year or so. Ubuntu, something really nice about an LTS is it's an LTS. It's a long-term support. So I believe 1604 is guaranteed through 2021. Don't quote me on that, but it's something like that. So at least with long-term support operating systems, you know that you're going to be fully supported up through a specific time. When was the last time Apple said, okay, we're going to cut service on this OS on this day? Only a couple months before they do it. Like, they don't give you any really long timeline, which is why I really like anything with LTS. Patching is something that you need to consider if you've never used Ubuntu or a Linux distro before. It's a little different, has its own caveats. Nginx updates, running the newest version of Nginx, would require you to take it down, lose the service, etc. Docker, you'll have a base OS. So like in my instance, Snappy is going to come out with updates a lot less frequently than Ubuntu or even Mac OS. Because it's so thin, there's not a lot there. And then Nginx patches, same thing, follows suit. Looks a little bit different with containerization. Instead of doing it on like the config on Ubuntu, you would have to, take the container down, pull the new image, create the new container, which doesn't take very long at all, but you could do it in line, which is really nice about Docker, but I digress. Munki repo security. This is something that I would like to stress to the folks that are just looking at Munki or just starting to look at Munki, that there are ways to secure your repo. I'm not going to get into this. This isn't a cert talk. This isn't how to secure your repo, both of which there are really good talks of out there. There's a great talk on certs by Ben Toms out of UK. He was at JNUC, which is the Jamf conference. Oh, yeah, whoa, Munki guy just quoted a Jamf source there. He's crazy. But it's a really good talk on certs and does a really good job of breaking down how certs work. Highly recommend it. And I believe it's called Let's Talk About Certs. Great intro, too. So anyways, I digress. And I think somebody's chuckling because they've probably seen it. So anyways, let's get into this. So the first type of security for Munki is no security. And this is kind of what most people, at least in my experience, have done, is it's wide open. It may only be available in your internal network, but it's wide open. If I go to yourrepo.domain.com/monkey_repo/catalogs/testing, I'm going to pull your testing catalog down. And I'm going to have access to everything that you have listed in your testing catalog. So this is kind of the most popular because it's the easiest to have no security. It's just wide open. Now, would people know to go to Munki repo/apps/Microsoft Office/ Microsoft Office 2016.2. whatever? No, probably not, but it's still open. The next layer of security you could do would be like a server-side cert, which would, make the handshake over SSL. Again, I'm not really going to talk about how to do this, but that's the next layer. The most secure layer I've seen in securing a Munki repo would be a client-side cert, to which a lot of people respond, that's way overkill and not worth the time. But back to the second or third slide, I work for a financial firm, so I get audited and I have to do certain things. So my end game, my vision for what this project would eventually lead to was this. So I actually posted a blog post. I got it working in testing that there's actually the use of client-side certs. So we're an AD infrastructure. We actually had a client pull down a client cert from our AD. So what happens here is, say you run Managed Software Center, and it goes out to pull down the updates. So it goes over to the server and says, hey, I would like to get a package. And the server will say, well, okay, hold on, who are you? And it would pass and say, okay, here's my cert. Okay, your cert matches our cert. Okay, here you go, here's your package. Whereas if a client didn't have a cert on their machine, they wouldn't be able to get the package. And you're thinking, why in the heck would I need to go through all that security to just download text editor that I can get for free anyways? Well, some people, like my organization, we have certain things that contain proprietary information. But a common one that I see a lot of times is people have, do you have a local admin that gets installed through a package or enforced? Things like that. Like anything like that can be intercepted and be used against you. But I'm not here to harp on security. Get enough of that while I'm at work. So just think about how secure is your repo. Just think about it, because there's a lot of different layers there. The next consideration I had was scalability. Okay, cool. I have 3 locations. I would like to scale it. How could I scale it? This is more of a high-end kind of like, oh, what could I do? What could I do? So Munki in a Box is really nice. I could tweak it to how I wanted it, and then I could just run it at every location, and there you go. It's good to go. I could run a VM, a macOS VM on ESXi. I could clone that around, but that sounds like a pretty bad time, and it was. I didn't have a lot of success with that. Ubuntu, you could do a management tool, Puppet or Chef, again, choose your flavor. That would do a lot of the orchestration of the setup for you. Or you could get a base image and then clone it over with whatever you're hosting it on, whether it's Hyper-V or whatever. With Docker scalability, as we saw in the illustration, it's a little bit simpler. All you would need would be, all you would need is a Docker file. There are ways that you can integrate Puppet and Chef with Docker and Kubernetes. And Docker is this huge, just for me, when I started this, it was a huge black pit of complexity. And it still is. But I kind of get the base idea. And when I started this, I hadn't even installed it on my Mac yet. All I had done is heard about it. So all of this is kind of coming out of this idea of, could I run Munki on Docker? So Mac OS, probably not the easiest to scale. Ubuntu, doable but complicated. Docker, doable but even more complicated from what I did. And then you have some caveats with each one individually. So with Mac OS, you're at Apple's whim. Like your hardware could have to change. It couldn't be supported after so long. You get the whole operating system. This is kind of what I mentioned with size, is you have everything that Mac OS does. Everything. Do you need everything Mac does for a file structure hosted from a web service? No, absolutely not. You don't need the hardware. You don't need to use the power. You don't need any of the other stuff. So that's just, same with Ubuntu. Like whether it's Ubuntu or Red Hat or Cent or whatever, you still have all of these other services running on a base server. Not to mention patching, and if you're running it on VM, you still have to manage all of that. And then for Docker, the learning curve was huge. I mean, huge. For me, y'all might be smarter than me. Visibility was really hard for me to understand that I can't get inside a container and then do stuff. That container exists as that container, and the only way to do anything is to get rid of it and spin another one up. Again, and then the whole complexity of maintaining it, of a structure that, and if I have time, which we probably will, I have a video to kind of illustrate how it would, to kind of visualize it, that I'll get to at the end. But yeah, the learning curve for me, it was a lot. It was a lot, and I felt like as I moved up and stuff, the baseline would adjust. And I would feel good, and I'd feel good, but then I would see this huge mountain in front of me, and so on and so forth. But I guess that's just IT in general. So in conclusion, what I did is I ended up settling on the middle one. I ended up, I have a pretty much ready to deploy instance of 1604 server running Nginx that's serving up a Munki repo. And what's best for me, it may not be best for you. It's all kind of your infrastructure. Some of the reasons I went with that is it's really easy to fit into our environment. We have a lot of Ubuntu machines already. They're not mine. I don't maintain them. But we have them, and it's kind of a structure that we kind of have a baseline for already in our organization. And my biggest thing was syncing. I wanted to sync to multiple locations, and it was just a lot easier to do in a couple different ways from a Linux machine than a Docker or Mac OS for me, and where I'm at right now and the constraints that I have. But that might not be best for you. You might be a one-man shop with a couple hundred machines, and a Mac Mini will do just fine. And that's awesome. Do it that way. Go for it. I know I talked to somebody in prep for this, and they're running one machine for like 200 plus Macs and stuff. Like, totally doable. Maybe Linux host is for you. I came from an environment, in my K-12 environment, that the Munki repo was hosted on Apache on Synology boxes. So it was still Apache as it was on Mac, but it was actually physically on the Apache app on Synology. There's a little magic in there to repoint where the repo is and stuff, but totally doable. Or if you're looking for some thin OS like Core OS, maybe cloud's for you. Maybe you have a super big environment and you want it to be always available anywhere people go. Gosh, I feel so bad for you if you do. I'm sorry. I couldn't fathom that kind of implementation. So I hope in conclusion here that Munki and Docker individually and together are a little bit less of a black box. And you've gleaned something. Like, you never want to touch it ever. Like, ugh, that sounds terrible. I don't know if I should do that. Or you can, it just like gets your gears turning and you can think of a bunch of things that you would want to try with it. I'm going to skip really quick to that video. This is just, I didn't know if I wanted to show this or not, but it's I really like it. Unless I deleted it out of this deck. Oh, I might have deleted it out of this deck. I did. OK. I will see if I can find that towards the end. But yeah, so I will show you here on the slide deck. If you go download it, when they post it, I have a bunch and a bunch and a bunch and a bunch of great resources out there. This section by itself is just on securing Munki alone, whether it's with Docker, whether it's with Puppet, whether it's bootstrapping it with, it's Puppet, but oh my gosh, so many great things in this community. I can't speak to it enough. And then these are a couple of the projects that I referenced. So the Munki Wiki, some Docker. If you want to learn Docker and it's something you want to do, they have a great tutorial, like I think it might be like 4 45-minute sessions. Super great, great to learn it. Core OS is something that you can run it on, but I won't read my resources to you. So I'm gonna hop back here. So yeah, thanks so much. I feel free to ask me questions. Like I said at the beginning, I'll do my best to answer them. This isn't my bread and butter. I was just an admin trying to figure out if this was for me or not. So thank you so much.